Billionaire mocks black waitress in German. When she responds fluently, he realizes the truth. What if the person serving your coffee knew more about your business than you thought possible? Margaret Williams adjusted her name tag one more time as she watched the expensive cars pull up to Romano's, the upscale restaurant where she'd been working evenings for the past 6 months. At 62, she'd never imagined she'd be taking orders again, but life had a way of surprising you. Her gentle hands, once steady over surgical instruments, now carried plates and refilled water glasses. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd once saved lives in operating rooms across 3 continents, and now she was asking if people wanted extra cream with their dessert. But Margaret needed this job, needed every penny it brought in. Her granddaughter Emma's medical school tuition wouldn't pay itself, and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Tonight felt different somehow, charged with an energy she couldn't quite place. Where are you watching from tonight? The evening rush was just beginning when Marcus Hartwell III swept through Romano's mahogany doors like he owned the place. And in a way, he did. His investment firm held a controlling stake in the restaurant chain. Margaret had seen his type before. Custom-tailored suit, platinum watch catching the light. That particular way wealthy men carried themselves as if the world owed them deference. She'd served plenty like him during her months here, but something about Marcus felt different. Colder. Margaret watched from behind the coffee station as he was seated at table 12, the prime spot overlooking the city lights. She'd heard the other servers whisper about him, how he never looked them in the eye, how he treated staff like furniture that happened to speak. The hostess, barely 21, visibly nervous as she pulled out his chair. Marcus didn't thank her. When Margaret approached his table with the wine menu, she offered her practiced smile. "Good evening, sir. Can I start you with something to drink?" Marcus barely glanced up from his phone, waving dismissively toward the wine list. His eyes held that particular emptiness she'd seen before in powerful men who'd forgotten what it felt like to see others as human. The evening progressed predictably. Marcus ordered the most expensive items, barely touched his food, and treated Margaret as if she were invisible. She refilled his water glass, cleared his appetizer plate, brought his entree, all while he conducted loud phone calls about mergers and acquisitions. Other diners occasionally glanced over, uncomfortable with his volume, but Margaret just did her job. She'd learned patience long ago. Then his business associate arrived, a nervous-looking man named Peterson who clearly feared his boss. They began discussing a deal, their voices carrying across the quiet dining room. Margaret couldn't help but overhear as she wiped down nearby tables. They were talking about a hospital system, something about cost-cutting measures and redundant personnel. The words made her stomach tighten. She knew that language, had heard it before when hospitals started viewing doctors as expenses rather than healers. Marcus laughed at something Peterson said, a sharp sound without warmth. Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. As Margaret approached to clear their dinner plates, Marcus's phone rang again. He answered immediately, switching to rapid German. "Die alte Arsten Word niemals verstehen, was wirklich passiert," he said with casual cruelty, his voice dripping with disdain. "Dies Menschen sind zu dumm, zu begreifen, dass ihr seid vorbei ist." The old doctor will never understand what's really happening. These people are too stupid to grasp that their time is over. Margaret's hands stilled on the plate she was lifting. The German words hit her like a physical blow, not just because she understood every syllable, but because she realized what Marcus was discussing. He was talking about Dr. Eleanor Martinez, the 68-year-old head of cardiology at St. Mary's, the same hospital where Margaret had worked for 37 years before her forced early retirement. The same hospital that was now part of Marcus's cost-cutting plans. "Sie Word kämpfen," Peterson replied nervously in broken German. "Aber wir werden gewinnen." "She will fight, but we will win." Marcus laughed again, that same cold sound, and continued in German, apparently feeling safe to speak freely in front of what he assumed was just another uneducated server. He described Dr. Martinez with words that made Margaret's heart ache, calling her obsolete, a relic. Someone who didn't understand modern healthcare was about profit margins, not patient care. Margaret stood perfectly still, her professional mask in place, but inside she was burning. Not just with anger, but with recognition. She knew Dr. Martinez personally. They'd worked together for 15 years. Eleanor was one of the finest physicians Margaret had ever known, someone who'd mentored young doctors and saved countless lives. To hear her spoken about like some inconvenient obstacle to profit felt like witnessing a personal attack on everything Margaret had dedicated her life to. As Marcus continued his callous assessment in German, describing plans to force out older medical staff to hire cheaper, younger replacements, Margaret felt something shift inside her. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. She'd spent 6 months staying invisible, keeping her head down, but some things were too important for silence. The conversation was escalating, and Margaret realized Marcus wasn't just talking about Dr. Martinez. He was describing a systematic plan to gut the hospital's most experienced staff. Marcus ended his phone call and immediately launched into another German conversation with Peterson, growing bolder and more callous by the minute. Dies alten Narren verstehen nicht, das die Medizin jetzt ein Geschaft ist, he said, gesturing dismissively. These old fools don't understand that medicine is now a business. Wir werden SIEL lassen, die sentimentalen Arzt, die zu viel kosten und zu wenig produzieren. We'll get rid of them all, the sentimental doctors who cost too much and produce too little. Margaret felt her composure cracking as Marcus detailed plans that would destroy lives she'd worked alongside for decades. He spoke about Dr. Rodriguez, who'd pioneered a children's cardiac program, calling him financially useless. He mocked Dr. Chen, who'd created a free clinic for underserved communities, saying her bleeding heart made her a liability. Each name he mentioned was someone Margaret knew, someone who'd devoted their life to healing. Then Marcus said something that nearly broke her resolve entirely. In German, he described how they'd already begun pressuring older doctors to retire early by making their working conditions impossible. Wie dies lächerlich Margaret Williams, he laughed. Die Dakt, sei Conti kämpfen. Jetzt serviert sei Coffee. Like that ridiculous Margaret Williams. She thought she could fight. Now she serves coffee. Margaret's breath caught. He knew who she was. Somehow, Marcus Hartwell knew exactly who she was and had orchestrated her fall from respected surgeon to restaurant server. The realization hit her like a wave. This wasn't random. Her early retirement, the sudden budget cuts that had forced her out, the impossibility of finding another position despite her stellar reputation, it had all been deliberate. Peterson shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the cruelty in his boss's words even if he didn't fully understand them. But Marcus continued, describing Margaret as an example of what happened to doctors who thought they were untouchable. He'd made her life a cautionary tale, a warning to other older physicians about what happened when they didn't quietly step aside for his business model. Standing there with dirty plates in her hands, Margaret felt the full weight of 6 months of humiliation, of watching her granddaughter stress about tuition money, of pretending this job was a choice rather than a necessity. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. But alongside the pain came something else, a burning clarity about what she had to do. Marcus Hartwell had underestimated her completely, and it was time he learned the truth about who he was dealing with. Margaret set down the plates with deliberate calm and stepped closer to Marcus's table. In perfect, accentless German, she said quietly. Entschuldigen Sie, Herr Hartwell, aber ich glaub, Sie haben einen Fehler gemacht. Excuse me, Mr. Hartwell, but I believe you've made a mistake. The color drained from Marcus's face as he looked up at her for the first time all evening, really looked at her. Peterson's eyes widened as Margaret continued in flawless German, her voice steady and professional. Ich bin Dr. Margaret Williams, Chefchirurgin MIT 37 Jahren Erfahrung. Und ich have Jed's Wort verstanden. I am Dr. Margaret Williams, chief surgeon with 37 years of experience. And I understood every word. Marcus's mouth opened and closed wordlessly as Margaret continued, switching to English so Peterson could understand. You see, Mr. Hartwell, during my residency in Berlin, I spent 3 years at Charite Hospital. I became fluent in German while learning advanced cardiac techniques from some of the world's finest surgeons. I also speak French and Spanish, skills I developed while doing humanitarian work in 12 different countries. She pulled out her phone with practiced efficiency and showed him the screen. "I've been recording this conversation. Every word about Dr. Martinez, Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Chen, and your systematic plan to force out experienced physicians. I'm particularly interested in your admission about orchestrating my own career destruction." Peterson was staring at Marcus in horror, finally understanding the scope of what his boss had been discussing. Marcus tried to regain his composure, but his voice cracked as he said, "You can't prove anything. That recording won't hold up." "Actually, it will," Margaret interrupted gently. "You see, I may be serving coffee now, but I still have friends. Dr. Elizabeth Harrison is now Chief of Staff at St. Mary's, and she's been looking for evidence of exactly this kind of interference. Judge Patricia Morris, who's on the hospital board, is my former patient. I removed a tumor that saved her life 8 years ago. And Attorney General Sarah Chen? I delivered her twin daughters when I was doing emergency room rotations 30 years ago." Marcus's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and Margaret could see the moment he realized that his assumptions about a mere waitress had led him into a trap of his own making. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. The recording was already uploading to a secure server, and tomorrow morning, the right people would have all the evidence they needed to stop his plans. Within 72 hours, the recording had made its way to every relevant authority. The state medical board launched an immediate investigation into Marcus's interference with hospital operations. Dr. Martinez was not only reinstated to her full position but was also asked to lead a task force on protecting physicians from corporate retaliation. The older doctors Marcus had targeted were invited back with full honors, and the free clinic Dr. Chen had created received a substantial grant from the state. Margaret returned to St. Mary's not as a surgeon, her hands weren't quite steady enough for that anymore, but as Director of Medical Ethics and Patient Advocacy. It was a position created specifically for her, recognizing that her unique experience gave her insights that could protect both patients and medical staff from future corporate overreach. The role came with a salary that not only covered Emma's medical school tuition but also allowed Margaret to establish a scholarship fund for students from working families. Marcus Hartwell faced federal charges for securities fraud and market manipulation. His business practices had extended far beyond the medical field, and Margaret's recording had opened floodgates of investigation. He lost his companies, his wealth, and his freedom. More importantly to Margaret, he could never again use his position to hurt people who dedicated their lives to helping others. On her first day back at St. Mary's, Margaret found a card on her desk from Dr. Martinez. "Thank you for reminding us all that healing comes in many forms," it read. "Sometimes the greatest surgery is cutting away the cancer of cruelty and greed." Emma called that evening, crying with relief and pride, telling her grandmother that she'd never been more inspired to become a doctor herself. Margaret kept her Romano's name tag in her desk drawer, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as proof that dignity doesn't come from your job title. It comes from how you treat others and how you stand up for what's right. She'd learned that wisdom has nothing to do with age and everything to do with experience, and that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who've learned to listen, to observe, and to act when action is needed most. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovering that true strength often comes disguised as quiet service, and that every person we meet carries stories more powerful than we might ever imagine.